buyers and sellers. Okay. Hey, you guys, this is for the general public, right? So this isn't just for kingdom entrepreneurs and marketplace ministers. Who am I? I'm Garlinda Price. I'm the broker and owner of Fusion Properties, LLC, and Fusion Insurance Group. And this might be a tough video for me to share. Because today we're going to talk about avoiding some of the challenges with probate, right? So I'm not a probate expert. I'm just sharing from the perspective of a loved one that is the administrator of my brother's estate, and I'm sharing as a realtor, right? So this is my 14th year in real estate and my 34th year next month in business ownership. Let me make sure I can go see y'all. Hold on a second. Okay, let me go find y'all over on Facebook, just so I can see the chat in case it pops up. Okay, there we are. So I'm speaking to you from a place of experience, right? So not only in the past, when I came into real estate in 2009, I came in on a market crash, right? So at the time when I came in, the Lord blessed me to specialize in short sales and foreclosures, right? Specifically short sales. I was a short sale expert. I'm still a short sale expert. And at first, I didn't want to do it, right? The very first short sale client I have, the home went to foreclosure. At the time, I wasn't an expert. It was my first one. I was freaking out. Why? Because someone lost their home. And I felt like they had lost their home on my watch. But that wasn't the case. The guy had been 6 months, almost a year behind on his mortgage, and he hadn't told me, so I didn't know, right? So shout out to everyone that's joining me over on YouTube, here on Facebook. I'm Garlinda Price, broker and owner of Fusion Properties, LLC, and Fusion Insurance Group. So today I'm sharing with you of how to avoid some of the challenges of probate, regardless of what state you're in. And the reason I wanted to share this is because on January 11th, I probably will never forget that date, January 11, 2023 at 9:44 a.m., my brother was pronounced dead. And I'm going to do my best to get through this video. And when the lady said, let's call it 9:44, she called the time of his death. So before that, he had gone into the hospital 3 weeks prior. He had battled cancer multiple times. This is probably his 5th time with cancer. And what ended up happening was the cancer had spread. It had metastasized, and it had gone to his brain. It had gone to his lungs. And it was just stressful, right? And so, but my brother is so brave, because even though he went into the hospital because he wasn't able to walk, right? And so he thought that he had just gotten an infection, just like he had previously had before. And the infection had spread. And so they were able to clear it up. He went home, got out of the hospital, all was well. But this time when he went to the hospital, the Lord had given me a vision that morning when he went into the hospital. And in the vision, I'm sharing with you all because many of you that follow me know I'm a pastor, know that I'm in the kingdom of God, right? So I want to share with you that the Lord will reveal things to us, and he will show us things. It doesn't always necessarily mean that we can do anything about it, right? But the Lord will show it to us. And so that morning when when I woke up, I had seen in the vision a person laying on the bed, and a white sheet went over them, and a white sheet came back off, right? And I thought it was my husband. So now I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh, the devil is alive and a defeated foe. So I began praying over my husband, right? Thank you for those of you that are joining. Today I'm talking to you about how to avoid some of the challenges of probate when a sibling or a family member or someone passes away, and if you happen to end up being the administrator of their estate. So that morning when I saw the vision, I prayed over my husband because I wasn't sure what it represented, right? But also at the same time, this dove had descended in our backyard. Now I'm rebuking the dove, right? Because it's a white bird. It stand out. It looked kind of goofy and kooky. And I was like, why is that white bird in the backyard? It just looks strange. And the Holy Spirit said, trust me. Like, basically, don't rebuke the bird. So I stopped rebuking the dove. It stayed out there. So from the time my brother was in the hospital until the day he passed away, the dove was there. So my brother ends up being in the hospital, and he at some point decides that he doesn't want to continue with radiation, right? So when he decided he didn't want to continue with radiation, that meant that he had accepted the fact that he was going to pass away. Now, he didn't know when, how soon, how fast, but of course he knew that he was going to pass away. That was his decision. He was firm on that. So that meant that immediately we had to go into the process of figuring out his affairs, right? So mind you, we didn't know any of his passwords to his phone. We didn't know passwords to his computer. We did not have access to his bank account. We didn't know who his beneficiary was. We didn't know if he had life insurance. We didn't have access to anything related to bank statements. None of his, we weren't on any of his bills. We were not on his mortgage. We didn't know if he had a beneficiary for the mortgage. We didn't know anything. So today I'm talking to you about how to avoid some of the challenges of probate when a family member passes away. And I'm sharing this with you not only from a realtor perspective or a real estate owner perspective, but as someone who is now the administrator of their brother's estate, right? So let's talk about those two terms. One is an administrator and one is an executor. Right. So come to find out, my brother, before he passed away, told us that he had a will. The will was in a drawer in a file cabinet in his room. It was probably the only document in that whole file cabinet. Right. And we had to go through looking for it, finally found it. And he had done it on Legal Shield. Right. So he had the will done online, which was nothing wrong with that. That's a great organization, but it wasn't notarized properly. So because it wasn't notarized properly, the estate office down in Durham, right, could not use it, right? So that meant that they basically considered or categorized his estate as of him passing away without a will. So now you have an administrator instead of an executor. So that's the difference, right? So, or executrix, however you want to call it, right? So now now what happens is, now we're there, we found out that he had a will. But then we find out that my mom is only on one of his bank accounts, which is a savings account. It's too late to add her to the account. We also don't have contact with the HR department for his job, right? Because we know where he works and who he works for, but we don't have a contact in the event something happens, because something's going to happen, right? So I'm sharing with you how to avoid challenges in the probate process when you have a loved one or family member that's getting ready to pass away, going to pass away, is sick, may die. So you know some of the things to put in place first, especially from a real estate perspective and an insurance perspective, so it's not a challenge later on. And at first it was very hard to go through this, and it's easier to talk about now because now it's months later, right? 10 months later since he passed away. It's just a little bit easier to talk about. So he asked me, Garlinda, can you be my beneficiary? Right? He's in the hospital and we know he's going to pass away. And I said, well, we can't do that now because it's too late. We don't have time to do that. So whoever you have in place as your beneficiary on all your documents at your job and anything you ever own, we're going to have to leave it like that because it's not time. So now what ends up happening is wisdom kicks in. I was going to say common sense, but wisdom is like the elevated version, the Christian version of common sense. Wisdom kicks in and says, I bet my mom and dad are not on his deed, right? So now, also, does he have a healthcare power of attorney? Does he have a general power of attorney? Now I'm realizing, and we're panicking because we don't know if he doesn't have any of this. We find out he has none of this stuff in place because he tells us, and he says, well, I'll take care of it. He's almost like not conscious about the fact, he's conscious, but not about the fact that you just made a decision not to continue radiation. This is only a matter of time. We don't know how much time. Literally every day I would pray that the Lord would stay the time, that my brother would stay alive in time enough for us to get his affairs in order. Glory to God. Every day when I was heading home from Durham to Fayetteville, and there would be times where I wasn't in Durham, but I was like trying to handle his business. I was like, Lord, please don't let him die today. God, give us time to handle his affairs and handle his business so that when he dies, we don't have a mess and a nightmare. Right. So the one thing that I knew as a realtor and as a real estate broker, I can't let his home get caught up in probate because probate can take a year. Right. That's the short version of probate. So probate can take a year. And so I contacted the real estate attorney that we do all of our closings with. And this is what you're going to want to do. If you have a family member that you are close to, a sibling, a parent, right, a grandparent, they're still alive and conscious and in their right mind, you want to add someone that is you want to put someone on the deed, right? So while my brother was still alive, coherent in his right mind, I added my mother to the deed, right? So I went to the real estate attorney's office. He drafted a general power of attorney, which meant she could handle his banking and business affairs while he was still alive, right? Because once someone is dead or passes away, the general power of attorney is no good, okay? So two things, when your family member is still alive in the land of the living and coherent, and doing well, you want to get a general power of attorney. That means that you can handle all their business. You can handle all of their affairs. You can access their banking. It gives you power of attorney over everything to do with them while they're in the land of the living. Secondarily, you want to add someone to your deed that you can trust, right? So I hurried up and added my mother to my brother's deed. We recorded it at the courthouse. So while he was still alive, that meant in the event he passed away, the property, the real estate would transfer to my mother. Okay. Now, the thing that I didn't take care of because I didn't know about and I learned in hindsight was what happens with someone's cars when they pass away, right? So he had one car that was paid for. So that car we were able to donate and give away, but he had a car that still had a balance owed on it. He had just gotten the car in December of last year, right? So what happens with the car? So now if someone dies and they own a car and the car still has a payment, we found out that someone can take over the car payment. They can assume it through the estate, right? So you don't have to give it back to the bank. You don't have to turn it back in, although you can do that, but we'll talk about that in a second, right? So we're talking about, if you're just joining me, avoiding some of the challenges with probate in the event, and this from a real estate and a personal property perspective, in the event someone dies or passes away in your family and or is going to die and pass away, and you find yourself having to address it or take care of it, I'm sharing with you some things to do to take care of it beforehand so that it doesn't become a later on, hey, Carol, hey again. So when my brother passed away, again, I inadvertently became the administrator of his estate in January because why? I knew that my mother could not handle the death of her son, right? So I stepped in and said, Mommy, I'll be the administrator of the estate. So we're talking about things to put in place for your loved one, yourself and your family member, lessons I learned, right? After the death, right? So before my brother died, again, we were able to add my mother to his deed, which meant when he passed away and when he died, my mother became the owner of the home. So that meant that my mother could make decisions about the sale of the property without it going through probate because of her being a joint owner, right? What was it called? Joint tenants, right? Because they were joint tenants on the deed, now she could step in and my mother was able to sell his home without it going through the probate process and then the probate courts and then having to do all those things. We were able to sell the home. So if you have a loved one, your spouse, your children, if they own a home, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, you want to make sure that someone else is on that deed besides just you and your loved one. Or if you're a single person, see, my brother was single, so he was on the deed by himself. So we added my mom. That meant that we could sell it and do everything with it without worrying about probate. So that worked out. But the car that he had, the car still had a balance on it, which meant now the car was a part of the estate, right? Samantha, she said the lady who filed a fake will against my parents' home in Texas committed a crime in probate court. Now I'm waiting for a civil case so I can have her daughter removed from the house. It's a terrible process, right? I'm sorry that happened, Samantha. And I do remember you and I talking about that. And so these are the things you want to have in place before a family member dies, because you don't know what's going to happen or come up, right? And we weren't expecting my brother to die. We weren't expecting the cancer to accelerate to the point where he goes in the hospital 1 week and 3 weeks later he's passed away, right? So the car. So you want to make sure that for your sibling, your parents, your family member, your husband, whoever it is, right, that you are on their car title. So what ended up happening was we were in contact because now my brother at that point has died. The car is there at the house. We've sold the house. And before the house closes, we've got to move this car. The car is in Durham. We're in Fayetteville, right? The estate had to be open in Durham, but we live in Fayetteville. So it's a lot of going back and forth, which is fine. So we had to decide so then we had to get an appraisal on the car through CarMax to say, okay, what could we potentially sell it for? Well, now a car, we all know it's devalued, right? Once you drive it off the lot, it's not worth the same thing it was when it was on the lot. So the car had lost value. So now we're trying to figure out, okay, are we going to pay from the money that we got from the sale of the house? Or are we going to pay the car off, even though the debt belongs to the estate? But what ended up happening was, my sister, on the day we went to get the car to take it to CarMax to sell it back and then pay the difference of whatever the estate owed from the car, which again, it's not your bill. We'll talk about that if I don't forget in a second. We drove to Durham. We went to get the car. We're on our way to CarMax. My sister's following me in my brother's car, and I'm driving my car. And she says the Holy Spirit tells her to buy the car, right? So now she's going to take over the car payments on my brother's car. I've never done that before. What are we doing? How are we going to figure this out, right? So I go to the DMV, and the lady said, well, since your brother just died and the tags are still good, you need to transfer title and ownership before the tags expire, because now that he's dead, you're not going to be able to get tags in a deceased person's name. So what was the lesson that I learned? If you have a spouse, a family member, your mother, your father, your sibling, your children, someone else also needs to be on the title with them, so that they own the car with you, or you own the car with them, so that when the other person dies, you can take care of business with the car. Okay. So fortunately, it was with CarMax, and CarMax has this seamless process of where you can assume a deceased person's title without even qualifying. They don't pull credit, right? They didn't do any of that stuff. My sister just had to show proof of insurance. And then after showing proof of insurance, she was able to take over the car payment, right? Which I think she's still doing it. But that process alone has taken at least 90 days. Right? So I'm talking to you today about the things to avoid that will help you avoid some challenges in the probate process. Be sure that with your home, okay, you're not the only person on the deed. With your home, for your grandparents, your parents, they're not the only person on the deed. If it's a mother still living and the father is dead and she's the only one on the deed, what happens is a married couple in the state of North Carolina owns a property wholly called tenants in the entirety. Right? So if the husband dies, the wife still owns the property automatically. If the wife dies, the husband still owns the property automatically. That's all great and good as long as one of them is still alive. But what happens now when both of them dies, their property, then if they didn't have a will, goes into the estate, and it goes into the probate process, which, like Samantha just shared, can be very and extremely challenging, right? So if you, as one of the children, was on the deed, or a grandchild was on the deed, or somebody else is on the deed, you can avoid the probate process with the real estate, because it then goes into that person's name. Now, a lot of people will listen to this or hear this and say, well, you can always create a trust. Not everybody has the money to establish a trust. And even though a trust is excellent and it does cost you money in the beginning and it's going to cost you money at the end, it is the best thing to have. I'm not going to talk to you about that because I don't have experience in that whole process, but I do know that you can create a trust for somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000 to $3,000. Everything goes into the trust, is protected, and you don't even have to go through probate, right? But then when it's time to go through the process after that person's died, you pay again for the attorney to walk the trust through closing, and you do all those things. Okay. But I'm talking about people that die with a will, without a will, don't have a trust, and it's in probate. Okay. So we sold the house, and then the car is transferred over, right? So you want to be sure that somebody else is on the deed with your sibling and your parents. How do you do that? I went to the real estate attorney that we use for closing. You can find a real estate attorney in your area. If you're in North Carolina, you can ask me about one. I can send you a real estate attorney in some of the different cities we've closed in. And what they can do is they'll put together a deed and say, who do you want to add? And then you all sign in front of a notary, and then you go record it at the courthouse. You're good to go. Okay. And then a general warranty deed. You want to be able to have someone that can access and do business for you, or you can do business for them. And you can only use the general warranty deed while they're alive, right? So when my brother was still alive, my mother needed to access his bank account. She needed to be able to go to State Employees Credit Union to see what he had in the account. Well, she ended up being on one of his accounts, which was his savings account. Her name was on the savings account. So because he was still alive, the banker was able to take the money that was in his checking account, move it over to his savings account, and then that way she could do business from the savings account to make sure his bills got paid while he was still alive, right? So you want to make sure that you have a general warranty deed that allows you to do business for the person that you're responsible for, or somebody in your family. So now that my son is 21, I'm like, we need to add you to our mortgage, and we need to add you to our bank accounts. And the minute that my daughter reaches It can be 18. The minute she reaches 18, she's going on our accounts. She's going on our deed. Why? Because I don't want anything, until we create a trust. I don't want anything to happen, and now nobody can access this stuff. It's a mess, right? So how to avoid the challenges of probate. So what else happened? So my brother ended up having expenses in different, his bills, right? The bills that were associated with his account. So now when you go to the probate office, they give you all this documentation and all this paperwork. You have to file taxes on the behalf of a deceased person, which makes no sense to me, right? But it's the taxes for the year that they were alive. You have to put a notice of death in a newspaper, one of two newspapers if you're in Durham, right? And then you have to wait a certain amount of, it's a notice of creditors. You have to put a notice of creditors out there to give the people that they owed money to the right to say, hey, that person died owing us money. Now, mind you, these are not your bills. You don't have to pay this stuff, but you do have to follow the probate process. If you have a trust, you do none of this, right? But if you don't have a trust, you have to follow the probate process for the creditors to lay claim to the estate. So therefore, what ended up happening was when he died, my mother was able to move the money from checking to savings, but then any other money that came into the estate, now those creditors can claim it for their bills to be paid, right? So we have to follow that whole process. What is some way to avoid that? Right? You don't have to pay those bills. But my mother was like, I want to pay off my son's bills. I don't want him to have any debt. That's what she wanted to do. That's what she chose to do. But just know that you don't have to do that. But I do recommend that you hire an estate attorney. Don't try to do it yourself. We were able to go through the probate process at Durham. They gave us all the paperwork. We got as far as we could. But once the notice of creditors started coming in and the notices of the people that said he owed them money, it became a little gray and confusing, right? And I'm college educated. So if it was college educated, if I'm college educated and it was confusing to me, imagine the person that has zero education, does not have a high level of understanding of reading and writing, has not ever seen, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, has not ever seen contracts or anything like that. Like my parents haven't looked at contracts. Like I've seen contracts for the last 14 years, right? And it was even confusing to me. So this is how people end up losing their properties, is through the probate process. They end up losing their properties because of the tax process. So when you wonder and you look back, well, what happened to grandma's property? What happened to granddaddy's property? What happened to mama and daddy's property? What happened to my siblings' property? It could have gotten jammed up in the probate process because if things weren't done properly, it could have gotten lost that way. Or like Samantha just said, fake documents, right? People laid claim to the property and now they own it. And you're like, where's the land? So by you putting yourself on the deed for land that your family owns or the deed for the home that your family owns, you can protect these things because now you own it. But how do you address the taxes, right? But we'll talk about that at the end. So what ended up happening was all those collections came in and I was like, well, what is we going to do? So my mom said, okay, at this point, I think we need to pay for an estate attorney. The estate attorney was $250 an hour. Right? And she gets paid from the estate. If you're the administrator of the estate or the executrix or executor of the estate, you can get paid from the estate, right? A percentage. So she was able to take my mom the rest of the way through the probate and estate process. What's some other things that would help make it less challenging? Having someone on your car title, placing someone on your deed, transferring ownership of the property before they pass away. Now, there would be tax ramifications, excuse me, that your tax professional could talk to you about. That was a big concern of my mom's, was like, well, what happens when we sell this property outside of probate, right? Because the house didn't go to probate. What happens when we sell this property and we get this large chunk of money? Are we going to owe money for taxes? But they didn't, right? Because it didn't have it. It was not capital gains tax, right? So then another thing was you need to know your family members' contact at their HR department. So that was something else we didn't have. We're talking about how to avoid some of the challenges of probate. So we knew my brother worked at MetLife, right? Because he loved his job. He loved his coworkers. They loved him. We knew he worked at MetLife. So before he died, one day I left the hospital and I said, okay, I'm going to go by MetLife. I need to find out what next steps are because my brother had, again, I shared with you in the beginning, had decided not to do radiation. So that meant it was only a matter of time before he passed away. But while he was in the land of the living and before he died, I need to know, MetLife, what's your process? Does my brother have insurance? Does he have life insurance? What does he have in place? We didn't know. So you need to know for your sibling, your spouse, your parents, your grandparents, the benefits contact the HR department at their job so that when they die, you can have access. I'm just looking for the HVAC guy. You can have access to knowing what's in place. So I go to MetLife. It's an incredible building, incredible staff, incredible people. And at the front desk, I tell them, hey, you know, my brother's in the hospital. And I ain't tell him that he was going to die. I just said, my brother's in the hospital and I need to speak with someone in your HR department to find out what the next steps are, because I don't know what to do in the event something happens to him. So of course that's strange, right? Because they're like, okay, who's your brother? So I tell them who my brother is. The HR person comes out. She's super sweet. Of course I break down crying, right? Because I'm talking about my brother and she's asking, well, is he going to make it? Is he going to be all right? And I'm very cryptic about what I'm sharing, because what if he doesn't pass away? Right now he needs to go back to his job. So I said, well, listen, we don't know, does he have life insurance? We don't know if he has insurance through his job. We don't know anything about his benefits package. So you want to know about the benefits package and the HR department for your family member, your spouse, your parents, your loved one before they die. So you know where their stuff is. I'm trying to tell you how to avoid the challenges of probate, right? Some of the challenges, because I haven't experienced all of them, thank God. But as the administrator of my brother's estate and as a real estate broker, I just want to share with you the things that will make it easier for you and your family. So the benefits lady sits down with me. She prays. She says a prayer with me, of course, so I'm sitting there crying. And she says, well, this is what we're going to do, right? Because he's still alive, what I'm going to do is alert his boss or his lead, his team lead. The team lead will then contact you and share with you how to connect with the benefits department. That's how it worked, right? So the team lead reached out to me. He's crying. He's a mess. His other friend reached out to me, who was his second person in control. She's crying. She's a mess. But they connect me with the benefits department. So then when he dies, ultimately, right, the benefits department then reaches out to me and says, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what we need. This is how to go about it. Now, mind you, they couldn't tell me anything because I wasn't the administrator yet of his estate. So we didn't even know if he had life insurance. So that's the third thing I want to talk about. You need to make sure your family has life insurance. I don't care. And this is not a cheap plug for life insurance. We're talking about how to avoid challenges in the probate process, right? So my brother in his will had already decided that he wanted to be cremated. We had already found out that the cremation where my mother went was, I think, $1,800, right? So that meant that my mother paid for his cremation services, was able to pay for it out of his bank account. Why? Because she was on his bank account. Other than that, she wouldn't have had access to it. She'd had to pay for it out of pocket. Because mind you, again, now we had sold his home and there was money there from the sale of his home, but she was using that to keep the car payment paid, some other stuff paid. That was, I forget what it was, but I know that one was the car payment. No, because the house hadn't sold yet. So she was making a mortgage payment from the account, right? Because she was on the account. So then we don't have access to know if he has life insurance. So if you don't have life insurance now, everybody's going to have to pool their money together to figure out how to bury your family member and your loved one. When y'all could just put together, let's just say that one person in the family, sometimes there's people in your family that don't have the money for insurance. They just don't, right? They're on a fixed income. They're doing the best that they can do. But a friend of mine, shout out to Erica Johnson, we happen to be on the same insurance team. And an idea that she and her family came up with was for that one family member that genuinely can't afford life insurance, is that everybody contributes $5 to $10 a month towards their policy, right? So whatever you need to do to put a policy in place for your family members, that's what you need to do. So we didn't know if he had one or not. Okay. So make sure your life insurance is in place and make sure who the beneficiary is. If you don't know who the beneficiaries are, you need to go find out. My brother, while he was still alive, could not remember if he had placed my parents as his beneficiary. I'm like, well, who the heck else would have been on there? The dog? He didn't have a dog. He wasn't married. He didn't have kids. How do you not know who the beneficiary is? But that's because he probably had so much other stuff on his mind. He's decided that he don't want to do radiation chemo. He's preparing for his death, right? So he couldn't remember. So now when he does pass away, I'm not yet the administrator. So therefore, when I'm asking the benefits department, does he have life insurance? They're like, well, we can't discuss that with you until you get those things in place. So what ends up happening, we get that stuff in place, which takes about 30 days. We get it in place, and then they mail an insurance check. So come to find out he did have life insurance. But is that how you want to find out that your family member has life insurance, that the check finally shows up? And it wasn't long. It didn't take a long time. But as an insurance broker, there are some companies that will take 6 months, 6 weeks, 1 year, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks to pay your family after the death of a loved one. You've got to prove, you got to send a death certificate. You've got to be the administrator. You have to have opened up an estate. They have to do their background to make sure that they go back through underwriting to see did your family member commit insurance fraud, to make sure that they didn't die from something that they missed it during the detection process of when the person was buying the policy. Now, I write for a company that they'll pay your family a check within 24 to 48 hours of their death. They don't wait for a death certificate. They don't look for any of that stuff, right? But I wasn't writing with that company yet when my brother died, okay? So there in North Carolina, you're guaranteed insurance regardless of your health, regardless of your background, regardless of do you smoke marijuana, none of that stuff, right? So there are companies that do that. So we had to wait to receive the insurance check for my brother, which meant, again, my parents paid out of pocket for his cremation service, for his cremation. But if he wanted a funeral, they would have had to pay it out of pocket for his funeral. Funerals now are ranging anywhere from $12,000 to $18,000, right? So you want to have insurance in place, and you want to make sure you know who the beneficiaries are, and you want to have a contingent beneficiary listed. Okay. So let's say that the person owns personal property, which I talked to you about what happened with my brother's car. But let's say your family member owns personal property, a mobile home, right? You need to make sure that if it's your parent, your grandparent, your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad, your cousin, whoever, that if they own a mobile home, because that's considered personal property, that someone is on the title with them at the DMV. Why? Because you're going to have to deal with the DMV during the probate process. Okay. So if you're on their title, what happened was nobody else was on my brother's car title. Fortunately, the lady, when I went to the DMV office to ask her about how to transfer the tags over or how to get a new sticker, because he had already paid the tax, he had paid the tax and tags in December, but they had never mailed it. So because they had never mailed it, the tags on his car were expired. But because even though he was dead, because the tags had not, the 30-day tag hadn't expired, she was able to give me the tag. And then my sister go through the process of assuming his loan, assuming his car loan. So had somebody been on the title with him, right, then we could have avoided a potential problem down the road. Because what happened was when my uncle passed away, my cousins parked my uncle's car because he's passed away now, right? So they need a new tag. You can't drive a car until probate's closed. So this is how you just want to avoid some of these challenges, is make sure for your family members, right? Again, doesn't matter who it is, that someone is on the deed. Someone besides your parents are on the deed. Someone besides your parents are on their title. You have a general power of attorney for your parents, your siblings, right? And then the last thing we'll talk about is a healthcare power of attorney. So the healthcare power of attorney was something that my brother was still alive. So that meant they came into the room and they asked him, did he want to be resuscitated? If he were to become incoherent, all these different healthcare questions. Who's going to be responsible for making health decisions for you? Y'all, this is tough. You know, so here it is. He's decided that he doesn't want radiation anymore. My mother is sitting there. She's now having to hear him tell her what his wishes are. And so she knows he's going to die. And now she knows she's going to be responsible for, he does not want to be resuscitated. These are things that if you take care of in advance, then when your loved one has decided these things, you can just sit and be with them without all these tough decisions, right? It's tough. And so I just want to share with you some of the things that will make it easier. Go ahead and get a healthcare power of attorney in place for your parents, your siblings, whoever it is. That way, when you already know what the decisions are to be made when they pass away, it's just easier. Okay, so then I just mentioned the insurance a second ago. So one of the companies that I write insurance with as a broker that will pay your family within 24 to 48 hours of passing away is different from life insurance, because it's a burial plan. So it's burial insurance. but then they'll also plan the funeral for you. They'll order the casket for you. They'll find out what clothes your loved one wanted to wear, because there's a little booklet and a membership card to come with it. And they'll handle all that for you. Versus my mom had to handle all that. And so in addition to grieving to her son, she's having to plan his funeral, which is why I stepped in to be his administrator. Okay, so these are just some of the things that would make it easier. You don't want to lose your family's property, their real estate, during the probate process. People sit and wait. Like Samantha just said it, right? I didn't read everything that she said. Samantha said, in Texas, DMV told me I could have done an affidavit of heirship on my dad's vehicle, but he had liens on them, so I let the creditors take them back. So she knows some stuff. That's not what you want to go through. That's not what you want to have happen. And sometimes there's just no way around it. Like if my sister hadn't taken over the car and the car was upside down and we didn't have the money to from the sale of his house to pay off the balance of the car, we'd have let the creditor take it back. Why? Because none of that stuff belongs to you. When a loved one passes away, you do not owe their bills. When a loved one passes away, you do not have to pay their debt. It's not yours. It belonged to them and their estate. But I'm just sharing with you how to protect the assets that your family member has before they pass away. Get on the deed. Add somebody to the deed that can be trusted. Right? Don't add somebody to the deed y'all know is janky and shiesty and going to steal money from everybody and not do right by the property when the person passes away. Don't do that, right? Because you know, right? Everybody knows who they're dealing with and what they're dealing with. So when the deed was in my mom's name, my mom didn't go about selling the property. I did, but they knew they could trust me, right? To get the property sold, to negotiate the sales price, to negotiate the deal, to get it done. They knew they could trust me, right? Because I've done this for strangers. So put somebody on the deed to these properties, especially your grandparents, especially places you consider homestead or the family home or where people want to go back to. Get somebody on the deed. I don't care what your grandparents say. I know they'll be fussing. A lot of times older people don't want you in their business. That's how my brother was. He's like, I'll take care of it. You don't need to know that. My sister would constantly ask him about, what do you have in place? This was his 5th time with cancer. She's like, what do you have in place? But he didn't want to deal with it. He didn't want to address it. And he didn't want to talk about it. But then it became us having to address it afterwards. And it was hard because we didn't necessarily get to grieve only. Now we have to grieve and take care of all this business, right? Which is not a bad thing. I'm just saying it could have been avoided. So get on the deed. Don't care what that takes. Get on the title. Don't care what that takes. The car titles, even if they're paid for vehicles, get on the car title. Even if it's a mobile home or a trailer, get on the car title. These things have value. It's an asset. Okay. Get on the bank accounts so that you can handle and manage their business, right? Now you can't do that after they pass away with the general warranty deed. You can't get on the bank account then. So if you get added to the bank account before they die, you just take it over and you can manage the money coming in and out. And it's not attached to the probate process because your name's on it. Okay. So these are just some of the challenges and the things that we had to endure and deal with going through the probate process for my brother that I wanted to share, because I was like, okay, Lord, now I didn't say what was the point? What's the lesson? And the lesson is people don't know what they don't know, right? So this whole video today is just to share with you, how do you avoid some of the challenges of the probate process when your family member is passing away, going to pass away. Everybody's going to die at some point, right? That's a hard reality. So when my brother died, these were the lessons that we learned. And before he died, these were the things that all of a sudden the Holy Spirit gave me that I had to click into action. And I was racing against the clock. Every day when I was having to go record something at the courthouse or run and get my parents to sign something, I felt so guilty, right? Because here he is, has made a decision that he doesn't want radiation. Here it is. My parents are dealing with the fact he doesn't want radiation, and I'm having to get everybody to sign documents, right? And so it made me feel like, I don't know, it made me feel grimy for some reason. It made me feel like, let me plug my computer. It made me feel like I was taking advantage, but I wasn't. I was having to do business and I was having to handle business because we had not handled the business. So that's the whole lesson that I learned, is that handle the business of your loved ones while they are still in the land of the living. Handle the business for yourself while you're still in the land of the living, because nothing is promised. So I'll end on this. So in the beginning, you heard me share about a vision I had the morning that my brother went in the hospital. I saw a white sheet go over someone and the white sheet came off. So immediately I thought it was Marvin. So I prayed over Marvin, didn't think anything of it. Later on that day, Marvin comes to the house and he's like, your mom's trying to reach you. Your brother's in the hospital. And I'm like, in the hospital for what? So I go get dressed. I drive to Durham. And I'm like, what's going on? Come on in. Oh, is it locked? Okay. And 3 weeks later, I realized the Lord had shown me his death. We saw that same vision on the day that he died and when the funeral home showed up. So get your family's affairs taken care of so you don't have to deal with it later. If you have questions, you can call me 910-494-7798. So God bless you guys. I'll talk to you soon. I'm coming. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
You're so sweet. Thank you for coming out today.
All right, I was just trying to say